Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy. With me, as always, Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hey there, how you doing?
Fantastic. How are you doing?
I've got COVID, but I'm going to record this anyway.
I know you're big girl pants on this one. You're bootstrapping it. So I'll give you a lot of credit. We were just talking before I hit record how I'm the biggest baby in the world. And if I was even had a hint of illness, this podcast would not be happening. But Jen obviously is a mom and is way tougher than I am. So here we go.
I'm going to excuse the coughing in advance.
No worries. All right. So today we have a very cool book that I had no idea even existed, and that Jen found and has done a summary of. And the book is called Trust Your Canary, Every Leader's Guide to Taming Workplace Incivility by Sharon Barr David. So no relation to Jen David Lang. But so Ms. Barr David's book here, you want to talk about why you picked this one? I mean, when I read through the summary, I'm like, whoa, this one's pretty cool. But go ahead, why'd you pick it?
Now, yeah, it was published a while ago in 2015. And I didn't do a full summary. I just did a short, 2-page thing. Um, but yeah, she says that two of the biggest drivers of incivility, two of the things that most lead to incivility in the workplace are organizational change and high stress levels. And it just seemed like we are going through a lot of that right now. And while it may not feel too optimistic to start 2024 with a podcast about incivility, it does seem like a few useful techniques could help lower the temperature and address those issues before they become larger than simply incivility.
Yeah, and I think as I read through it too, it does check our boxes for things that we like to talk about, where she has some great almost scripts in there for what to say when you as a leader or even as a participant in a group, experience incivility. So I know, right? It's nice when we experience civility, right? But so let's get into it. Why, so what does she say about, well, first of all, can we go with the title? She
Yeah.
says, trust your canary. So if you're not familiar with, the canary in the coal mine, is it a metaphor? No, because it's a real thing.
I think
But
it's real, or
yes,
was, maybe not now.
maybe
Animal
not.
Kingdom, I don't know.
Yeah. So tell us about why there's a canary involved in this.
Well, at some point, coal miners carried these live canaries into mines because the canaries were happy. They would chirp, they would sing. It was lovely because they're breathing clean air. But as soon as the air got bad, there were gases or other things in the air, the canaries would die. And that would alert the miners to danger. And so it is a metaphor here for this book, in that, we do have an inner canary, right? Most of us do have some sense, some gut that incivility is occurring in our school, in our district. And, whether you listen to that inner canary is really up to you. And that's why the book it's trust. You should trust your inner canary.
So basically broken down into three sections: how to recognize incivility, what you need to address it instead of ignoring it. And we'll talk about that in depth, and then how to respond to it. So let's go with how to recognize it and how to trust that internal canary. So what's she have to say about that?
Well, my favorite, and again, these are just a few ideas. You got to read the book for the rest of them. But my favorite one is this banner test. And it sounds like the kind of thing you would love too, Mike. So, you see something happening in a hallway or a meeting and you're not sure, right? Is this incivility? Should I say something? So what she says is use the banner test. Imagine that whatever was said or done is displayed in enormous lettering in the front of your school, right? So, you're walking down the hall and a teacher is grading, and the teacher says, they don't pay me enough to deal with this crap. And you're thinking, should I let it go? Not a big deal. But now imagine parents, community come into your school, and the first thing they see is a big banner. They don't pay me enough to deal with this crap. Like, right, is that what you want? Or you're leading some professional learning session and three teachers have their laptops up and they're on, whatever, TikTok, right? So imagine that image. Do you want that image in the front of your school building of these three teachers who are not paying attention during professional learning time? So that's really my favorite one for recognizing incivility.
I
And then,
love that. Yeah,
yeah,
and my grandmother used to say something similar to me. She would say, whenever, anybody would question whether or not they should say something or bring something up or whatever, her test was always, is that something you would stand up in the middle of church and scream out? Right? So same idea, right? Like, is it something you would want the community to think about you and your system? So I love
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and that helps to make it crystal clear. And she gives a couple of, she gives small examples. I can share some of them, but we're not talking about, the larger issues. We're not talking about a staff member harming a student or a racist remark. Those are things that need to be dealt with, but she's talking about the smaller things that build to lead to a toxic culture. So, eye-rolling gossip and sarcasm, interrupting, clicks, talking down to people, even things like asking for input and ignoring it. Certainly using devices during meetings. I'm sure you and I have seen a few of those going on. Arriving late to meetings, even arriving late. We're seeing a lot of staff members arrive late just to school. So those kinds of things she would consider to be incivility. So I do think it is something that we don't have trouble recognizing, but the banner will help us see, oh, I should probably do something about this.
Well, and we're not going to get into this today, but I wonder how much of it is just a general, if some of it is just a general, I don't want to say this the wrong way, as if there's judgment attached to it, but just how the workplace in general seems to be becoming less formal.
Yeah.
You think that's accurate?
Yeah, I do think part of it it's becoming informal. I think some of it is the pandemic, right? We all worked at home in our pajamas and we didn't have everything as professional as others would want it to be. I think that's part of it. And then part of it is like she said, teachers are dealing with a lot of change right now and a lot of stress. We're having teacher retention issues, we're having teachers are out and we're asking them to cover for other teachers because we can't find subs. So you can see how all this behavior is more likely when people are a bit at their wits' end.
Well, and I think there is a tendency to blame this on generational differences because, I'm old and that's what old people do, right? We blame it on the young people. But I'm sure each of us, and everybody listening can picture people of various ages acting in civil ways. So I don't feel like this is that connected to, generational differences. I really think I think there's a huge culture piece in terms of, what's expected and what's allowed. And that, you know, I, and I know we'll talk about this, but I think that is well within the purview of the locus of control of the leader to act upon. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So she identifies some reasons and you identified them in the summary, some reasons to address instead of ignoring the incivility, because any sort of response, right, that a leader has is matters and sends a message. Because even if you choose not to respond, that's sending a message. So you want to talk a little bit about, why empirically it's a good idea to respond to incivility for the health of your system?
Yeah, she shared some research and some statistics, which of course you and I always love. And I connected them to issues in school. So the first one I connected to teacher retention, the topic I just mentioned. She found that 78% on the receiving end of incivility feel less committed to their organization, and 12% actually leave. So if you let incivility reign in your school, that might mean 1 out of 8 of your teachers is leaving because of it, right? So that's a pretty high percentage there. So that's one reason when you're
And
thinking,
that one too, even if it's just like perceived little things, like even somebody experiences incivility and they brush it off and it's not a big deal. But what that becomes is it might it might not be a reason to leave, but it's also certainly not a reason to stay. And
Mhm.
I think there's a bit of a nuance there, but still having the same effect.
But school
How,
culture, yeah, it's,
yeah.
culture is a big reason why teachers don't stay. And, and the second one I attribute to school culture or climate. She said 25% of people on the receiving end of incivility admit to taking out their frustration on others who are not the offender. So think about that. If a teacher feels on the receiving end and they're going to take it out on others, right? Who are they going to take it out on, right? Their students? We want a school where teachers are treating each other poorly and then taking it out on students? No, I mean, that's just not what they need. Our students need teachers who are in control of their emotions, right? And they certainly don't need a teacher whose emotions are out of control and have no idea how to manage them, right? So that's a second huge reason, right? We don't want teachers taking the incivil culture out on the students. And then the final reason is just the work itself, right? So she shares that among people on the receiving end of workplace incivility, 48% intentionally decrease their work effort. 47% intentionally decrease time spent at work, right? We're talking about the absences, and 38% intentionally decrease the quality of their work. So we know the work of schools is not anywhere close to being done. We don't need decreased quality work in our teachers. We need increased, right? We just can't afford, in many senses of the word afford, to have teachers who are decreasing the quality of their work, not showing up at school. So there's a pretty strong imperative to address incivility.
And so, like with most things, in terms of addressing anything in a culture of an organization, it first helps to look at oneself and one's own behavior. So, you want to talk a little bit about addressing incivility within yourself? We are typically our own favorite topic of conversation, right? So, here we go.
Yes, yes. No, I mean, I think it's for anything you want to change in your school, it's always great to look inward first. But she says, take a look at yourself, right? Are you actually engaging in some of these behaviors yourself, right? Do you come late to meetings? Do you have your laptop open in a meeting or when you're talking to a teacher? Are you getting beeps from your phone and looking through your phone? So sometimes, you might just be really stressed out and you're letting that override your manners, but people are paying attention. The leader's actions and the leader's emotions are contagious. So really start with yourself. If you feel like, oh, I'm a straight shooter, I give it to teachers as I see it, right? When you observe classes without any sense of tough feedback can be tough feedback. So put your manners back into place and work on yourself first.
And
Um,
there are certainly ways to, deliver growth producing feedback. We've talked about giving feedback before and growth producing feedback, right? Like trying to change people's behavior, but you don't have to be mean about it. Like there's ways to do it.
There are ways to do it. And it's not just about your manners. She also says, and looking at yourself, like look at issues of fairness, right? Do you have some teachers that you observe more and give feedback to more, right? Teachers note that kind of stuff. Who's complaining? And of the people complaining, do you listen to some people and not others, right? Are you giving privileges? Do you put some people on certain committees, save some people from grunt work? Think about how you assign duties because being fair is part of being civil. And then finally, yeah, just like look at your behavior, walk through the hallway, keep your face up, greet everybody, don't blame others, take blame yourself when you can. If you're in a rush and you're writing an email, I do this sometimes, stop, go back to the first line and write something nice, like, how you doing? Soften it a little bit. But really start by examining yourself. That's the best way in thinking about addressing incivility in your school.
And even having a conversation with people. There's a great example in there, like about email. Like, you think that, you're being concise and to the point where other people might read it as terse and unfeeling. But to have the conversation ahead of time to say, hey, listen, if I send you a 1 or 2 word email, it's not because I'm mad. It's just because I'm trying to get through email. And, it's okay. But you got to read the room and you got to read the culture. If you're in a system that values that kind of, couple of sentences preamble in an email about, how you doing, Jen? How are the girls? Everything going well? How's your husband doing? That kind of thing. I think there's a balance, right? I mean, we're at work, but at the same time, we're dealing with people.
Yeah, it's a people profession.
All right. So now, okay, so we've taken a little look inward and we've examined our own behavior, maybe communicated with some folks. Um, what happens when, and I would argue too, just as an addendum to that, if you're unsure of how you come across to people, ask trusted colleagues. I often do that when I'm in a meeting and something didn't feel right. If I don't stop it in the meeting and say, hey, this doesn't feel right, what's going on? And maybe after the meeting, I'll ask a colleague who was in there, I'm like, did I come on too strong? What was going on? I was trying to read the room and I couldn't really get a sense of how people were feeling, and then, ultimately, I'll get the feedback. It'll be, yeah, that was a little tough. You could have gone a little softer on that. Or nope, it was super clear and this one's on them.
Yeah, no, at the end of this overview, the first steps I suggest are doing some surveys. But I think what I like about your suggestion is it's not a survey, which takes time. You said it's an immediate, you ran the meeting, everyone's fresh from the meeting, and you tap a few trusted colleagues to say, hey, how did I come across? So
Well,
that's,
it was funny. I had a meeting the other day with my direct reports, and we were talking about um, just something that we were asking our next level of leadership to do. And I didn't think it was an unreasonable ask. And then a couple of the folks kind of reacted in a way, like just sort of asking questions and poking holes and what about this and what about that? And there was something about it that just set me off. And I don't raise my voice or anything, but I got a little snippy. I'm like, what are we doing here? And then I sort of paused and I said to them, because I have great relationships with these folks, and I said, wow, that was kind of an outsized reaction. Sorry about that. And I said, I don't really know why I reacted that way. And then we proceeded to have a conversation of them telling me probably why I reacted the way I did. And then we got to a great place. But I think but that comes with time. Like you can't just walk into a new organization and pop off and then say, hey, oops, sorry. So
well,
there's,
it's not just time, it's also, you have some evolved emotional intelligence skills, to be able to stop like that and do an aside like in Shakespeare, to
yep,
comment on your behavior to everyone. It's not just the actual commenting on it, but you're showing people that you are looking at yourself, from the balcony, from the outside, and that helps people feel reassured, like, oh, okay, maybe Mike crossed the line there, but he's aware of it, so we can work with that.
right. So, all right. So now when you see it in others, so you're in a meeting, you get the eye roll, you get the heavy sighs, the body language that's showing people are disengaging.
Yeah.
What are we
Well,
supposed to do?
I mean, I think the first thing has a lot to do with the emotional intelligence we are just talking about, but it's first look at yourself because it's easy to be pissed, right? You spent hours planning this professional learning session, or this meeting or whatever, and somebody's rolling their eyes. So start with yourself, right? Because your own behaviors and expressions are leaky. So try to relax, try to check your own body language and make sure you're not conveying how upset you are, even though you are, right? So be relaxed, breathe, take a moment, pause. That's a first step. And then second, it often helps to diffuse things if you own your own contribution, right? It's almost like an apology to start with yourself. I guess I didn't really communicate the expectations clearly enough, right? I know I've probably permitted this kind of thing in the past, but I want to talk about it now. So really starting with yourself and saying, this is my fault for not outlining clear enough behaviors or expectations. And then she just has something simple, right? When it's the kind of in the moment interaction, you don't want something complicated. So she takes her initials, Sharon Bar David, SBD. I don't know if that was on purpose. And she has a very quick SBD formula to think about. Very simply and cleanly, state the expectation, right? What was it that you want? So being able to innovate is vital to serving our students. So we all need to respect each other when we share new ideas. Boom, just a clear expectation. Then the B is the behavior that you don't want, right? So I understand that when Miss Wilcox was speaking in the team meeting yesterday, you interrupted and called her idea stupid, right? So the expectation, the behavior you don't want, and then D, then give the desired behavior, right? I expect you to listen to your colleagues' ideas, and if you disagree with them, say so respectfully. Just keep it simple. Those three steps. It's one suggestion she has for for confronting and addressing the incivility immediately.
Well, and I like how you started with acknowledging that it may have been something that you overlooked in the past, and then addressing it, because sometimes I've found that sometimes where, all of a sudden this isn't okay. Like it was okay before, so now it's not. What's going on here? So by kind of hitting that one up front, that takes some of the air out of the system, right? When you say, listen, time out here. I know we may have been okay with that kind of comment or that kind of tone in the past, but we're not doing that anymore. So, let's reframe that, or even something as simple as, nope, we're not going to talk about that now. This is what we're talking about. And I think, in something you're not judging, it's just matter of fact. Nope, this is what we're doing. But again, like that takes some confidence in your own ability, and also in the folks around you, that they're going to respond appropriately to that.
Well, and it gets back to what you were talking about, Mike. You could not address it, but you're really sending the message that you condone it. And that's far worse if you go back to those statistics and the teachers leaving and the teachers treating students poorly because of this culture. So, have those statistics in mind and put your big person pants on and try the SBD method.
Well, and I think too, humor can be, depending on the situation and depending on your relationships with the folks in the room, that can be an effective strategy. And sometimes even just calling it out with genuine surprise. Like I've done that before, when somebody in a meeting just sort of goes off, and I'll be like, "Whoa, that seemed like it came from out of nowhere. Is everything all right?"
Mhm.
Or like approaching it from care and concern of the person, or, gee, Jen, that doesn't sound like you. What's going on, this, or you might, it sounds like you have strong feelings about that. And I think you can say that. Now this is a tricky part too, because sometimes you say those things like, say more about that, or it seems like you have strong feelings. Now, depending on how you say that, that can be wildly patronizing, or it can come from a place of legitimate concern and sincerity. So I think that's going to be about you and your personality and how you're able to deliver those kinds of comments, as much as it is what you say, don't you think?
Yeah, well, and also your earlier line of, Jen, that doesn't sound like you. What that does is it gives the person the benefit of the doubt,
Yep.
especially if it's been preceded by you stated the expectation, the inappropriate behavior and the desired behavior, and then you put in some of that, that doesn't sound like you, right? Is this the
Yeah.
COVID speaking? You give the person an out. You've outlined what the clear appropriate behavior is, and then you're assuming the best of them, which
Yeah.
is a good
Or even
thing.
like, whoa, that was a little harsh.
Yeah.
Like, just, I think sometimes, if at least from my perspective, if I can say something that is in alignment with what my natural reaction was,
Mhm.
then I feel like it's going to be more sincere.
Yeah.
And I think it's when we try to, it's when the things we say don't match how we feel, I think is when the inauthenticity comes out and shoots us in the foot.
Yeah.
So
And the
in
goal
turn, yeah,
isn't to do this SBD thing is sort of like this scripted, like inauthentic thing. It's just to give you a tool. Like basically,
exactly.
what do you expect? What are you seeing? Just try to do something clear and simple. And yes, put your own twist on it so it feels natural.
And I've worked with some groups where, there's a norm that, you kind of almost have like a code word, that when something starts, when, somebody's starting to go down a road that's a little, harsh or whatever, to, whether, hey, time out. Nope, let's come back to here. Or, some sort of signal that, is part of the group norms that says, guys, we all agreed that we were going to, respectfully disagree with one another. This is a really charged topic. So, I mean, it's hard to not get emotional about it. I get it. I have strong feelings about it, but we really got to try to look at this objectively.
Yeah.
And just, and I think, I don't know, I just feel like the more, I keep saying matter of fact, but that's sort of the thing. Like if you can be matter of fact about it and not get charged up yourself, that's going to bring, the temperature down for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's what you want to do. I remember when my kids were in preschool and the preschool teachers would say, is this going to make the problem bigger or smaller? Right.
Love
So,
that.
we want to
Yeah.
make it smaller. So however you can do that.
Yeah. Or, let's work on the problem, not the people. You
Yes.
know, what's the issue here?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, a lot of great, scripts and ideas in here, and even hearkening back to, norms or a mission and vision of the organization, if it's appropriate, if you can, hey, in this school, we value civility and, being kind to one another. And, especially like if you can preset people sometimes, like if you have a sense that there's going to be some wild disagreement about some topic on the agenda, maybe right before that topic, say, hey, we're about to talk about the snow day notification policy or practice. And I know that, that's stuck in a couple of your all's craws, and it's a tough one for you, but hey, we really want to keep this objective. Let's talk about the process. Let's try to leave the people out of it, and then kind of setting that. And then if somebody heads off in that direction, you can say, hey, remember we talked about at the beginning, we're not going to talk about how this is all Jen's fault. We're going to focus on the problem, right? Something to that effect.
Well, I think it's great the idea of preempting it. If you know you're having a difficult or controversial conversation, I think that works really well when you have, community meeting with parents. If you have, yeah, a difficult conversation coming up, I think to preempt it is very helpful.
And I would make the suggestion, and we've talked about this before in different contexts. Like if you've got that difficult conversation or meeting coming up, call a trusted colleague ahead of time and say, hey, I've got this coming up. Will you help me practice what I'm going to say? Or would you ask me the difficult and snarky questions so that I'm ready to respond when they come? And that just makes it so much easier to go into that meeting, because then if those things come up, you're ready. And if they don't come up, great. You're still ready to go.
Yeah, or alternatively, it sounds silly, but stand in front of a mirror and say these things, right? So
Absolutely.
let's say Mike's been coming late to school every day, right? And you need to say something, and it's 10 p.m. at night, you don't have that trusted colleague, just go in front of the mirror and try to say something that fits into this SBD structure or whatever works for you and get it out there. Because, yeah, we say in education, we don't practice enough. So consider practicing it.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
one more point, she says, to really, that's when you're planning something ahead of time, but she's really arguing for when you see something in public to say something in public because of that powerful message you send to all the other people if you don't say something. And obviously, if it's a hugely, if it's an issue of safety, of course you're going to intervene. If it's a larger issue, you might just say something to stem the tide and then say, hey, I need to set up a meeting to talk to you later. But the importance of in public saying something with the goal of making it smaller, with the goal of keeping the relationship intact and stopping whatever the behavior is, but to really say something in public would be the best way to go.
Absolutely. And even if it's, I think of the big ones, like if it's racist, if it's sexist, if it's something that is diametrically opposed to how we feel about children, okay, that you know that's not how we approach things around here. So, or and maybe that's the way to just sort of drop that and let it hang for a second. But I think sometimes too, if it's not quite to that level, to say something after the person talks, to say something like, hey, Jen, I'd like to talk more with you about that after this meeting, but for now, let's move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah, and then
And then
you
then
are going to
people,
follow up. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, man. I
So
feel like that time flies when you're having fun, Jen. Look at that.
fun with a
Wow.
disability. But and two quick things for next steps. So you're left with all this. One suggestion is to consider asking a trusted colleague or so to give you feedback on your behavior. So, hey, in this meeting we're having tomorrow, can you look at my behavior? Am I doing anything that inadvertently I am suggesting it's okay to be incivil at school? And then it's some kind of larger survey tool, either something online or talk to a few teachers. Just ask them, right? How would you rate respect in our school environment? 1 to 10, right? Do you feel respected at work? How respected do you feel? And even or what ideas do you have that would make that a higher rating? So just something simple to sort of see how people are feeling about this if you're starting to feel like the incivility is on the rise.
Yeah. I think this is a great book, and I love the concepts in it. And you have a one pager that we're going to link to in the show notes
Yeah.
for 8 ways that leaders fail to address incivility at work. So some pitfalls to avoid. So we'll put that in the show notes so people can access that. And yeah, I think this is a very appropriate time to be having these conversations, especially we're recording this in January of 2024, but we're entering an election season that is likely to be very incivil. So I think that does have a way of spilling over into our work in schools, and I think being ready to address it in a productive and constructive way is an important tool in the toolbox for school administrators.
It's a good time to take a look. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Jen. I hope you feel better. May the may the
Thanks.
may the COVIDness end quickly and get back at it. And thanks everybody for listening. And as always, if you have any suggestions, please let us know. My email's in the show notes, and we will link to that document that Jen created. And thanks for joining us.
Take care. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.